also reach out to me, ask questions or anything, anytime in between. So to answer your question, to give a brief of a background, like while doing my bachelor's at Bombay College of Pharmacy, the main thing that was installed or instilled in us was that we have to be primarily drug developers. So what does that mean? So always try to understand what the big picture is about drug development, as to why you are doing certain things, why you are taking certain courses, and how you can go about in fulfilling whatever goals and objectives that you have set to yourself. So for myself, while doing my bachelor's, I always wanted to be a drug developer. So in order to achieve that, after completing my bachelor's in pharmacy, I gave my GRE and came to the US to do my PhD in pharmaceutics, in which I wanted to learn more in details about formulation and preclinical aspects about formulation and PKPD modeling. So I spoke to my advisor, and at that time, Dr. Dinah Chow, she told me that this is an excellent viewpoint that you have come with, that you want to become a drug developer. So in order to achieve that, um, uh, uh, I did my formulations, my preclinical aspects. And once I completed that, during my PhD itself, I had the privilege or the opportunity to do two summer internships, which helped me a lot. The first was at Pfizer. So that was in formulations per se. And later on, I did it in biomarine pharmaceuticals, which was more into clinical pharmacology and clinical PKPD modeling. So that's where I got my interest developed keenly in clinical pharmacology. And that was obviously a goal that I had set, as I mentioned earlier, that be curious, be inspired, set your goals. So that was the goal that I had set for myself, to become a drug developer. So after my PhD, I did not apply for any jobs or any industrial opportunities, but I wanted to do a specific postdoctoral fellowship at University of Florida. And why I chose that was because it was led by Dr. Larry Lesko. So he was the clinical pharmacology head at the US FDA. So I knew for sure that if I did my postdoctoral fellowship under his guidance, I would definitely be, learning drug development better. So after my PhD, I did a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at University of Florida, which helped me get a lot of understanding about the clinical aspects of things, including how we can utilize or leverage clinical data to project like first in human dose, or to have like dose recommendations, and also the involvement of pharmacometrics, which brings a lot of PKPD modeling into clinical pharmacology. So having that, so like that is how I developed my career abroad, and that is why I chose to go into the school that I chose to, and also did a postdoctoral fellowship. So the going back to the second part of the question, which was regarding the pros and cons of it. So the pros of it are, of course, as we say in Sanskrit, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that world is your playground, or the world should be your playground always. So let's say even if you're doing your, let's say, bachelor's in India, then you can explore opportunities abroad, wherein you get a different mindset about doing things. And apart from your professional life, personally also, you become way more independent than independent in terms of having an independent mindset with in terms of research, as well as your personal life. So that is the the pro of it. Like, you get to learn a lot of different avenues, because the way let's say pharmaceutics or pharmacology or medchem that is conducted, let's say, in different countries, might be a bit different. So that is very important that you try to get as much as international exposure as possible. And also, what I wanted to let you guys know is that even if you, like, let's say, do your master's and PhD in India, which is excellent, after that, let's say, if your goal is to get into academics, or if your goal is to get into industry, try to get any international experience abroad in any of the different countries that are there, like US, UK, Australia. and try to learn how the drug development works over there. So it will give you a broad perspective as to what to bring back to India and how to develop your career. I mean, I would say that you would miss your family, of course, and probably your friends. And let's say, let's say if you are way too familiar with the entire coursework and entire structure of how the industry works in a particular country, there might be a bit of a transition that is required, which is a steep learning curve that might be required. But there are more pros to it than cons, personally speaking.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tanay, for this. And I would like to ask one more question. How does a student choose a university? Is it actually university dependent or subject dependent? How do you choose your mentors while applying for any courses abroad?
Oh, yes, that is an excellent question. So, yes, I mean, of course, the convention holds that brand name holds value, and it is certainly true in some cases. However, for, let's say, doing your PhD per se, or going into the graduate school or higher education, the advisor and how the coursework is structured in a particular program is of utmost importance. Because for me, I really wanted to do my PhD in, let's say, pharmaceutics. That's what I wanted to do when I was in my bachelor's. And that's why I chose a program in which, let's say, you can speak to alumni, or you can speak to, let's say, ex-students who have just graduated from that university or any other university to get an alignment as to what the coursework is, what the mentors do, what the overall structure is, how the mentor is per se when you're doing your PhD. And I would personally choose the mentor and the projects that that person does, or your advisor, rather than the school name itself. But yes, if you are, let's say, doing your master's first, maybe you can explore like different schools and then zoom in down on your PhDs. So one thing that I wanted to mention is that, and that is probably one minor mistake that I might have done in my career. It was that I did not do my master's first. I directly went into the PhD. I was very lucky and fortunate enough to get an excellent advisor, very supportive advisor. And let's say she gave me a lot of different projects, a lot of different opportunities to do internships and all. But there might be some cases in which you might not be that lucky. So I would suggest that if you don't know what in which field you want to do your PhD in, try to do your master's first, get an understanding about how that field is in that particular country. And then after that, you can zoom in into your PhD either with the same advisor, or like your avenues would explode, and you can get different opportunities in different, let's say, universities. Because there are a lot of my colleagues who, let's say, have done their masters in, let's say, medchem, and then they might have gone on to a different field to do their PhD in. Let's say they might have done their PhD in pharmaceutics or pharmacology or some other field. So, or even like health economics and policy outcomes. So that's why, I mean, you can do your master's, then get into the PhD if you don't know exactly in which field you want to do your PhD. So I hope I
Okay,
answered
Dr.
that question.
Tanay, yes, that answers the question very aptly. I am now taking questions from the students, so I'll just request them to unmute themselves and ask you question one by one. Is that comfortable? Okay,
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'll just ask Neha Prasad to unmute herself and ask the question. Neha?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Uh, so I just wanted to ask. So in the US, it's very uncertain now studying abroad, considering that they are canceling, they're going to suspend the OPT and even H1B and all. So, uh, which other countries would you suggest for higher studies?
Yeah, so hi Neha, and thanks a lot for that question. So I would say that uncertainty per se always exists, like no matter where you go or what you do. So, I mean, given the, I mean, personally, I won't comment on any of the political situations, but Currently, at least, they have not cancelled any F1 visas or any OPT STEM extensions or any H1s. And let's say a country like US, they really need good scientists or good drug developers or good people to come here and study and like carry on their research baton. However, if let's say someone is not that keen on coming to the US, some other countries that you can explore are Canada, then UK, Australia, then let's say, and in fact, a couple of my friends had also done a different course in, let's say, cosmetics in France as well. And as you know, that France is one of the hubs for cosmetics, like cosmetic companies. So yeah, so I mean, France is also one opportunity. One thing, and that might be a very sensitive topic right now, are some of the people that I know have done their PhDs or done their masters in the US, and they have even gone to China to do their, let's say, PhDs or like masters and all. So that is something that if you know that a professor is excellent, because they also do a like excellent research there. So you can definitely look into those opportunities as well. And also like, yeah, and many of like a couple of my colleagues over here have even, let's say, explored opportunities in India to do their PhDs. And also it's like wherever you feel comfortable in, or wherever you feel that, yes, your potential will be maximized, please look into that rather than being country specific.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Dr. Tanay. May I now request Yash Shah to raise his question? Yash?
Yes, ma'am. So my question was that while going abroad, like, did you apply for scholarships? Like, and if so, can you elaborate on it?
Yeah, thanks, Yash, for that very relevant question. So when I did my when I was doing my bachelor's, I took my GRE in my second year because I wanted some time after I took my GRE in order to explore various opportunities in the US specifically. So while applying, I mainly applied to a lot of PhD programs in which typically you get like you get scholarships as well as a regular monthly stipend to sustain yourself, not only in terms of your education related needs, but also your personal needs as well. So now there was not like a special scholarship that I applied to, but depending on your application and depending on how badly the school wants you, they can even give you a particular scholarship. So in my case and a couple of other of my University of Houston alumni, they received a presidential fellowship, which means that they give you a certain like a additional scholarship in order to let's say do your research or get into your let's say academic coursework and all. So you don't need to like specifically apply to any like specific scholarships, because most of the scholarships that are over here are typically towards US citizens. And of course you can explore, but the school will offer you mainly like a complete waiver for your tuition and also a stipend if you do a PhD program. But for masters, over the years I have seen that the number of scholarships or funding has reduced a bit, but like, of course, it is on case-to-case basis.
Thank you, sir. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll put next question. Shivam, can you ask your question to sir?
Good evening, sir. I wanted to ask, like, if someone wants to do a career in drug discovery, so what are the qualities, or you can say, how one should go about it?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shivam, for that question. In terms of drug discovery, of course, there are many opportunities over here. So once, let's say, I don't know at what stage in career you are right now, but I'm assuming that if you are, let's say, batch. So sorry to customize my answer. Are you a bachelor student right now or
Sec-
a master's?
Second B Farm student.
Okay, great. So if you want to get into drug discovery, then of course you would want to focus on drug discovery related courses a lot. And as I mentioned earlier, be curious, be inspired. So like your curiosity should, let's say, not only extend to your coursework, your lab work, but also go into, let's say, international journals and read through a lot of international articles or relevant research that like you are interested in drug discovery, and let's say have a mentor or two, or your champion as they call, let's say in Bombay College of Pharmacy. And there are excellent professors in Bombay College of Pharmacy, and like they also, like, I mean, train me very well. So you can have a champion, let's say in Bombay College of Pharmacy. Not only that, but when you are going through, let's say, drug discovery journals, articles, there are authors, their correspondence emails are mentioned on any of the articles. So you can feel free to reach out with any relevant questions or anything that is on your mind to that particular author, and you can have an international champion, if you might call, as well. So you can get to learn with respect to drug discovery, and then once you know what you want to do, then you can explore. Let's say that author is a professor in a particular university, then you can reach out to that particular professor and see if your interests match, and then you can go for further education over there.
Thank you, sir, so much.
Okay, thank you, Shivam. One more question from my side, Tanay, if I may ask. Generally, we are very, skeptical about SOP and CV. So, what is your point of view? What should be things that should be featured in one's SOP or CV while applying, especially for the postgraduate courses?
Yeah,
Any?
thank you, Galvina. So, with respect to the SOPs and CVs, so first we'll take the SOP aspect of it. So, your SOPs per se, let's say if you are applying to University X and your research interests are XYZ, so you can focus or try to develop a story. So, you have to have a narrative as to why you want to do. I mean, I go back to my initial aspects as to the why and how. So you have to show them why. So which comes about like your curiosity, like why you want to pursue that particular higher education, and how brings how will you be able to add on to what they already have in their particular program, or how will you be able to support their goals and objectives. So that is what I mean. You have to have a good story in your let's say SOP, which is inspired and curious to give an understanding about what your persona is, or what your research interests, what your goals are, so that let's say a reader while going through that particular SOP has to follow your let's say life story or your research story well in order. So it is just like reading a research paper. Let's say if people have put in a lot of fancy terms in it, or let's say people have put in a lot of jargon in it, like there might be only a top few who might understand it, but there might be many who will just skim through and say, oh, this is something which I don't understand, and that will not pique their interest. So if you want to have, let's say, an unknown person through go through hundreds of SOPs and pick yours as the best, you need to have a credible story to your application. Then going to the second part of it, which is a CV. So CVs could typically, so how I typically design my CVs or have been doing it is that you can have your first section, which is your overall career goal as to what you want to achieve. And then go into, let's say, all your, let's say, credentials, or like basically your academic affiliations, your credentials, your publications, and also do not hesitate to mention any awards or scholarships that you might have earned, or any leadership opportunities, or any leadership opportunities that you might have taken during your, let's say, your BPharm or your masters or anything. So to give a relevant example, when I was doing my bachelor's at Bombay College of Pharmacy, I had the great opportunity to work with IPA, MSB, or in fact, IPA Students Forum as well, as the co-chair of one of our conferences. Like, it was the first nationwide conferences that we had organized, the IPA SC, which was the Students Congress. And there we had Dr. Kalam come in as the chief guest. And so my point being that these are certain things that you can mention in your CV, so that the reader knows that not only you are a good researcher based on all your research credentials, but also you're a good leader in terms of not only your, let's say, your career, but also in your overall personal aspect as well. So that is something, I mean, that is one experience that I can share in terms of designing a CV.
Okay, Tanay, we have Vivek back. So Vivek wants to put a question to you for all of the audience.
Sure.
Vivek and Tanay has been colleagues for quite long in their BPharm time, if I'm right. Okay, Vivek, over to you.
Hi, Tanay. Sorry, I am a bit late. I just came from another webinar, so I got a bit delayed. But happy to see you and have you with us today, counseling our students. So just to tell all of you, yeah, we are from the same batch of BPharm 2009. So we've spent our BPharm and BCP together. Tanay, just want to ask you one thing. How much do you think recos play a role in eliminating competition or in enhancing your selection when you apply abroad? From
Oh,
your view.
yeah, thanks a lot, Vivek, for that excellent question. And yes, Vivek and I go way back. And first of all, I wanted to give a big shout out to Vivek for going back to BCP and being a professor and choosing the academic field. I've always believed that Vivek was one of the very good students, and it comes back to my point being inspired per se. So Vivek was one of our inspirations when we were doing our bachelor's. So yeah. So yes, sorry Vivek, I missed
Yeah,
your question.
so thanks, Tanay, for this very humble statement. No, the question was like, how do you see a recommendation which a student takes from a faculty, which either may enhance his selection criteria or which may help in elimination of competition? Because I see that many people have really close GRE scores, and that time something that differentiates would be a CV, which of course is in your hands to build, and then a reco, which you might get from one of your faculty members. So how do you see that as a distinguishing parameter or something that would help you go through in your experience?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for repeating the question, and I'm sorry I missed my train of thought. So, yeah, so with respect to letters of recommendation, I think they hold a great value to your overall application per se, because yes, a great recommendation can make a career, or a really bad recommendation can break a career. However, what I feel is that when you have a great like having, let's say, a great impersonal recommendation does not hold a lot of value, but a great or a good personal recommendation might hold, even like it will hold great value in adding on to your let's say overall application. So let's say I will give you an example. Let's say if someone writes in a recommendation letter that this person has done XYZ in terms of research and has been selected as one of the leading researchers in the country. That is one recommendation. The second recommendation, oh, this person has done XYZ, how it was impactful for their organization, or how, I mean, what difference did it cause to an XYZ project. And let's say I've known this person for XYZ years, and that person has
Okay.
consistently been performing. So that recommendation, according to me, will hold more value because it is a
Okay.
personalized good recommendation rather than being just an impersonal great recommendation. So let's say whenever any student is seeking any recommendations from any of the professors or any of, let's say, any alumni or anyone in their field, rather than just sending them your CV and asking them to write something based on that, make sure that you know that person well, and in fact that person knows you well professionally as well
Okay.
as personally, so that they can put in or instill a personal like a personal note in the
Okay.
recommendation letter. And instead of like let's say eliminating competition, see how you can elevate yourself in your competition, so that you can get into, like, let's say, the school of your dreams or the program of your dreams.
Yeah, I think this has given some idea to the students about how to, get their echo letters, which will give them an edge over others. Tanay, I don't know if this has been covered. I mean, but I'm asking you. We know that SUTIX rules in India among all the fields of pharmacy. And I also remember when I was talking to you sometime during my master's, you had told me that there is a lot of scope of actually biopharmaceutics and pharmacokinetics over SUTIX at that time in US. Does it still hold true, or how do you see the various domains of pharma? Which one is having greater scope now, as per your understanding?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Vivek. I mean, when you talk about scope, it is, personally, I feel all fields have scope. It is more about how you build up your career in that particular field in order to like reach, let's say, the best you can do or reach the top in that particular field. So even if you are doing like pharmaceutics, which is like more into like formulations and all, like, let's say, characterizations, pre-formulation.
Tanay, just one to
Mhm.
interrupt you, sorry, but is there something called pharmaceutics there? Because when I was I mean, I just happened to be in Finland for some time, and I realized they don't have anything called as pharmaceutics. Either it was pharmaceutical technology, which kind of was more towards manufacturing, or then there was physical pharmacy, which was more towards the core basic R&D. So how is it in US? I mean, did you come across such a subject called pharmaceutics during the course curriculum?
So as they say, like, what's in a name, right? So for me, actually, my PhD is in pharmaceutics. So yes, there is
Okay.
a field called pharmaceutics, even in the US or anywhere abroad. So people might call it I mean, so that's the beauty about our field. It is a very like a broad field in which you can explore multiple opportunities. So for me, when I came here, pharmaceutics was the name of the program, in which
Okay.
you could explore formulations, you could explore preclinical PK, you could explore pharmacodynamics, you could explore, let's say, pharmacokinetics, so on and so forth, also clinical pharmacokinetics. So the way you can take a look at, let's say, any like pharmaceutical technology or pharmaceutics, try to understand the big picture as to why you are doing it. First of all, let's say you develop a formulation. So you have to understand not only developing that formulation, but where that formulation is going to land up. That formulation is going to land up in patients. So in order to do that, or to have, let's say, the best formulation that you can formulate so as to get the best patient compliance, or let's say the best formulation that will go in patients, what you need to do to customize it so that not only it impacts the formulation aspects of it, let's say in terms of solubility, dissolution, or whatever, whichever formulation you are using, and then see how it translates into preclinical species, because that's where probably like the main drug might be tested, and how it mainly translates into the clinic, because that's where the main formulation which is marketed is tested. So pharmaceutics is a like a broad field in which you can do multiple things per se.
Okay, I think that answers the question. And Shivam is asking, Galvina has a question, but before Galvina, I'll just take Shivam's question. He's asking, what is the difference between PK and clinical PK?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So pharmacokinetics can include everything, right? Like you can have, let's say, preclinical pharmacokinetics in which you do like pharmacokinetic studies or pharmacokinetic
I
assessments in preclinical species, let's say mice, rat. Sorry, Vivek, did you have something to
No,
say?
no, I'm just saying, I think so he is from SYB farm, so I think he didn't know this aspect of clinical and preclinical. So I think, yeah, you are elaborating. Please continue. So just wanted to tell you that.
Yes,
Like,
yes. So let's say so basically pharmacokinetics is regarding the kinetics of pharmaceutical drug products, right? Like when you give the drug to the body, so it is basically what the body does to the drug, like let's say absorption, metabolism, distribution, so on and so forth. So that absorption, metabolism, and so on and so forth also occurs in animals, but you cannot test any drug directly in humans. So you have to test them in animals first in order to understand what the overall kinetics or what the overall elimination pathway is, or like not pathways, but what the overall elimination is for a particular drug, or how the drug behaves. Is it causing toxicity which leads to, let's say, or what the drug does to the body, which is pharmacodynamics. So is there any like toxicity concern, any allergic reactions in animals, so on and so forth. And so basically, pharmacokinetics has multiple segments as well, right? Like preclinical pharmacokinetics, and then you have clinical pharmacokinetics. So once you have a good understanding about the pharmacokinetics of a drug or the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic interactions of a particular drug in a preclinical species, then a particular dose is selected or a range of doses are selected so that they can be tested in humans. And that's where the clinical pharmacokinetics comes into being. Whereas, let's say, because of the differences in the drug metabolizing enzymes between preclinical species or pathways from preclinical species to clinical species, pharmacokinetics can be a bit different. So you test the pharmacokinetics as well as the impact of pharmacokinetics on the pharmacodynamics, which is the safety and efficacy of the drug, which is equally, if not more important, in the clinic. So that's where the clinical pharmacokinetics comes into play.
Yeah, I think that answers the question. I think Galvina, you have a question, right?
Yes. Tanay, I'd like to ask you one more question. What is your perspective on distance education? How relevant they are as compared to actual learning? Do distance education count when we look for jobs, opportunities, or anywhere else?
Yes, yes. So of course, like as we all know, that and I hope like everyone is being safe back in India, and even in the US or anywhere in the world, given the current situation. Like distant learning and e-courses or anything. I mean, if they have not yet exploded, they are going to explode soon in terms of, let's say, getting an entire degree online. Of course, I mean, they might have to figure out certain tweaks or certain streamlining about lab work, so on and so forth. However, given that currently the field that I'm in, which is clinical pharmacology and pharmacometrics, I mean, I don't enter the lab, right? So everything is done, like I do all my work on my laptop or my computer or everything. So if there is a similar coursework that is geared towards that, let's say, I'll give you an example. University of Maryland, here they give a master's course, and I'm not sure if they do a PhD course, but I'm sure that they have a master's course in pharmacometrics. So everything is online. So basically, if you are, let's say, a student even in India, you can reach out to them, enroll in that particular degree, and you can get a master's in pharmacometrics from University of Maryland. So that entire course is online. So when you do like distant learning, so that is a prime example of distant learning, which you can even do sitting anywhere in the world and get relevant courses. So I've also seen a couple of like premier MBA schools like Harvard or Wharton, or they are also transitioning a lot of their courses online. So distant learning is definitely catching up, not only in like our field of pharmacy, but also everywhere else.
Thank you, Tanay. If I can just ask one more question. In terms of applying for job post your education there, I know always there are going to be visa issues. So how likely or unlikely you're like to, I mean, you have an opportunity to get a job as compared to a Native American?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Thanks, Galvina. The main thing is that I personally feel that if you're like good in your field, and if you know your stuff well, you don't have to chase companies. Companies will chase you. And trust me on it, visa is not an issue. Like if a particular industry, like a company needs you, they will do whatever they can to get you the visa. So it is not only like an H1 visa, but you have also, I mean, we all, like after doing your masters or your PhDs, you come into outstanding researcher visa, which is an O1 visa. So you can get that visa. They can even apply for your green card. You can work on your OPD. So there are multiple aspects to get into the workforce or a job. And it's not that you only, like after doing your PhD from the US, have to get a let's say a good job in the US. You can get a good job anywhere else in the world. A lot of my friends have gone to Europe to do their jobs. A lot of them have gone back to India to do their jobs. A lot of them have gone, as I mentioned earlier, to China to do their jobs. So it is, I mean, more than just like a visa stamp or something, which may not define your career overall. And you will get good jobs and you will have good career so long as you have put in your hard work.
Thank you, Tanay. I mean, that answers to a lot of queries our students have with regards to job also. Next question is from Shivam. So, Shivam, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Uh,
Shivam.
yeah. So I have a question. Like most of the pharma companies, what they do, like while doing the clinical trials on the humans, so they pay some amount to the patients. Okay, so to take that drug and to like so so what is more preferred? Like if you are making a drug, okay, and then you are administrating it to the patients that are in the US, or you will administer it to the patients that are in India, because what I have seen or what I have read is like in the US they pay a huge amount to the patients, while in India it is like very cheap. So it is also very financially it is supporting the company also.
Okay, so if I understand, and thanks a lot for bringing up this question, because the understanding, so yeah, so I just wanted to mention that whenever, so I'm involved in late stage drug development as well as early stage drug development. So the way a particular study is designed, or let's say a phase 3 study or the last confirmatory study that is designed, or even early on, we try to have like or like tease out the ethnic sensitivity or the ethnic differences in pharmacokinetics, efficacy, and safety throughout the world. So it's not only that we have to pay patients or people over here more. That's why we chose people in India. It's more about understanding how the drug would work, let's say in a particular patient population, because as you know that let's say a Japanese patient population might have certain drug metabolizing enzymes which might be a bit different from, let's say, Caucasians, or let's say Indians, or some other ethnic ethnicities. So in terms of that, all those patients are enrolled. So we work on global trials in which a patient, a representative patient population is selected based on their race, their ethnicity, their body weight, their age, so on and so forth. have like different segments or what we call covariates in a particular clinical trial so as to have a consolidated understanding. And so, I mean, contrary to what outsiders might think, pharmaceutical industry, or at least I can talk about a lot of industries, like they want to develop good medicines to reach the patients for the patient benefit. So for us as well, like it is always an ideology of patient first, no matter where that patient is or no matter what that patient does. So it is, according to me, like not about payment to a particular patient just to enroll, but it is more about understanding what the drug does in a particular patient population throughout the world. So that's where being a drug developer also comes into being, that you have to understand the entire process in order to develop good drugs, and you can only do that when you are testing the drugs in different populations in the world.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Tanay.
Yeah,
I have one. Yeah, Swarnadeep has one question. So can I ask him to? Swarnadeep, can you raise your question to sir?
Yes, ma'am. Hello.
hello. Yes, I can hear you, Sondeep.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Sundip here. Sir, I am asking what are the types in the different research in US and India?
Oh, can you please elaborate a bit further on that question? I'm not sure I understood that well. Sorry.
Yes, sir. I am asking what are the basics of research? Mean, if we are selecting one topic in India
Mhm.
or in abroad, any topic such as drug discovery or any ailment. So, what are the types of research? Means, what are the difference in doing research in US and in India? Whether it is it should any technology based
Pranay,
difference
yeah, I
or
think
any.
what Swarnadeep is asking is like how do you see research being different abroad versus the way we pursue out here in India? So I'm sure that you have also seen how we do masters. I mean, you have done from abroad, so definitely you have an experience on that. And then you have also done, you've seen how BCP has been working and how we do here the research in India. So what differences do you see and how maybe we can match up something on that? Is that right, Swarnadeep, if I got the question correctly?
Yes, sir, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good question, and I can give you a brief, I mean, a good flavor about how research is done in the US. And I can, I mean, let's say we can discuss as to how we can compare those two. So here it is mainly regarding the funding that a particular professor gets in terms of, let's say, any industrial project or any let's say government related agencies, NIH projects, so on and so forth, like regulatory projects. So based on that funding, a particular research is developed. And of course, like if you have a particular idea and if there is enough funding with the professor, or you can write your own grants and so on and so forth. And I'm pretty sure that in India as well, I mean, personally, I'm not too experienced in
Yes,
that. So I'm
no, I
sorry, I
think
won't be
it
able
is the
to
same.
uh, yes, so you have to like write appropriate grants, and also like there are funding
Tanmay,
opportunities.
here we do that. We do that. We have to write grants, and it's usually then once we have the students. I think this part goes pretty much the way you have in US too. Like we have to write. So or either we have industrial project or then we write government grants. Like maybe you have NIH there, we have DBT, DST here, something like that.
Yes. So, I mean, one thing that came to my mind is that, and of course, US professors might be already doing it, but what I feel is that sometimes, and like in India or something, I mean, because of, let's say, certain restrictions or certain funding issues or something, um, innovation might be taking a bit of a backseat. So let's say if there is an X pool of funding that a particular professor has, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be totally wrong here, but let's say have a couple of risky or innovative projects in your pipeline. So as soon as some funding comes in, you can utilize that to, or like, let's say, pitch in good ideas to, let's say, whatever the funding agencies are, to have a couple of innovative or risky projects apart from the conventional or traditional projects that are done year in and year out. Of course, those are very important in order to take the field ahead. But let's say one innovative project or two innovative projects which like might pop up in, like, you are right. I mean, that is a story. Like, I mean, I'd heard even in my B farm that a professor or someone got a snake in his dream and they understood the structure of benzene. So, like, let's say if you have such a dream, like, make sure that you implement it rather than postponing it.
Right. Yeah, I think I'll just add to Tanay's answer from Indian perspective. We do focus on innovation, but the way it goes is many of these agencies have specific areas in which we have to write projects. So that is something that we adhere to. Like, so if there is a call, we write a project and we get it, or if there is some industry and we come up with an idea. So we can go on that part. Do you see any differences in methodology or way of working out here and out there? I don't know whether you've really seen here, but there, how do you? I mean, what is the plan? So when you started your PhD, how did you go about planning it, and what was your thought process? So
Yeah.
if you
So
can just tell us something about it.
yes, so that is a very relevant question, and thank you for raising that. Because here, I mean, I can talk about the work culture in the US and how the projects might work and everything. Is that, let's say, here I feel like I had like excellent flexibility in order to like do different projects and work on different things that I really wanted to do. So I'll give you a specific example that when I was doing my PhD, I had completed all my formulation work, all my like PK work, or like the basic parts of my PhD, and I could have gotten my PhD based on that work. But I really wanted to do, let's say, the efficacy or the toxicity side of things. So I had the fortunate, I mean, I was really fortunate in having my school in Texas Medical Center, which is one of the biggest medical centers in the world. So you must have heard about an institution called MD Anderson Cancer Center. So MD Anderson does cutting edge research in cancer in the oncology field. So I approached one of the top professors over there, and Dr. Nora Navon, and I directly. So my advice. So that's where your advisor and your dynamics with your advisor plays a lot of role. So my advisor was kind enough for letting me approach an external professor directly to, let's say, establish working contact with her in terms of let's say using their mice tumor model in order to test my formulation, and that was never done before in our school. So that is something that like flexibility and the will to reach out to relevant experts in your field in order to establish that relationship and getting that a project done or something. Like, I mean, that is something that is very flexible over here, or innovation is valued a lot in terms of getting things done quickly in the US, at least. I mean, that is what I can talk about.
Okay. I think Swarnadeep does. Do you have any more queries with respect to this?
No, sir. Understood. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Tanay, I'll just ask you one question. So can you tell us, tell the students, like the various graduate programs that you had? So you went directly after BPharm, and now there are a lot of BPharm students attending this meeting. So how they can, I don't know if this has been asked before by any of them, but uh, what could be the approach, and how, what could be, I mean, what programs could they target, and how does it work out there? So because I remember you going for an integrated one, and then there are standalone programs also. So just some information on all that.
Yes, yes, sure, sure. So, I mean, I can go into the details about like various programs and all. So, of course, like after your bachelor's, you can choose to do your master's in or master's and or PhD in what we call as the big three or big four of pharmacy, which is like pharmaceutics, pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, pharmacognosy, so on and so forth in either let's say India or the US or wherever. Then apart from that, so like yeah, so that's where you can build your career, become a drug developer. But to become, I mean, to finally get into like drug development, there are also other aspects to it. Not only research, like I mean, of course, it is research based, but not the big three or big four as we call it, but also like something called as health economics and policy outcomes. So that is something that is also done on a regular basis by a lot of BPharm graduates. After they come over here, you can explore that field as well. And then you also have cosmetics that you can explore, which is also a very good field, which is quite unexplored actually in the US and also in a lot of European countries. So that is also something that can be done. So yeah, so but yeah, what and of course there are multiple fields in which after doing your health economics policy outcomes coursework, you can get into let's say the marketing side of things or overall reimbursement side of things. So there are many things. So that's what I feel like the training that we achieve or like receive in
So
Bombay College of Pharmacy or any of the
Tanay,
pharmaceutical. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, just to interrupt. So these are MS programs or these are PhD programs? I mean,
Both, both.
okay, so you can also pursue an integrated one just like the way you've done and in that specialization.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
exactly. So in cosmetics per se, I'm not sure whether there are like direct PhDs, but yes, there are masters. But in health economics and policy outcomes, yes, there are both masters as well as PhDs.
Okay. Yeah, you were saying, I mean, I just interrupted you in between. So
No, no, no. So I wanted to say that like the coursework actually that we have in our B Farm is, I mean, geared towards actually making you a drug developer because there are so many different courses and so many like opportunities that I personally had not realized when I was doing my B Farm. But after doing my B
right.
Farm and getting over here, I realized that so now, I mean, I have like a good working knowledge about formulations, preclinical, clinical, even like physical pharmacy. Like there are so many things that are taught during BPharm where it is not projected as becoming drug developers, but that is what we end up becoming. Yeah.
Yes. I think this should answer the question, guys. If you have anything else that you wish to ask Tanay, yeah, there is one by Shivam again. Shivam, you want to unmute yourself and go ahead?
So I wanted to ask, do you have any idea regarding what, matlab how the lead compound is selected and its optimization goes?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, so typically what happens is that like I have personally not worked early in the early discovery stage, but what is typically done is that there is like a lot of compounds that are chemically like typically what happens is that they like screen a lot of compounds early on to select a particular drug candidate. So it would also actually depend on the how big or how like what is the funding scene of a particular company because they might select like two or three lead candidates and do preclinical testing on it and then take it into the clinic. Or some companies which are a bit smaller, they might not have the resources to do it, so they might select just one candidate per se. And so that is the drug discovery side of things. So I mean, they typically screen a lot of compounds and look at specific targets, specific mechanism of action. And nowadays, as you know, like not only based on small molecules, but there are a lot of monoclonal antibodies or biologics that are coming into being. So it is more about like devising the exact monoclonal antibody rather than screening a lot. And so it is more about target based rather than the biologic or a molecule based. So it is like you define the targets, and even one of the leaders in our organization say that none of the diseases he feels is incurable. It's just that we have not found the right targets for them. So, or even if we have the right targets, we don't have the right drugs for them. So that's how like they select the like do lead optimization or select optimal drugs.
I think this answers the question, Shivam. Tanay, just one thing on this. I mean, now since you spoke on molecules and receptors and targets and curable diseases, so here we see the trend is moving from small molecules to macromolecules or proteins and stuff like that. Is it the same there? I mean, has really small molecules been compressed, or it is dwindling, or I don't know how to say it, but its importance is going down while the large molecules or the proteins, peptides are gaining a lot of impetus. So how do you see it there?
Yeah, so I feel that currently we are going into a trend of getting best of both worlds. So as you know that early on it was only small molecules. Then later on there was a slow influx of biologics, proteins, monoclonal antibodies, so on and so forth. And now, in fact, it is becoming even more interesting, as I might put, because they are doing like antibody drug conjugates, which means that mainly like the like the monoclonal antibody might act as a carrier, and the drug will go and have a show efficacy or like reach a particular target, or vice versa, and so on and so forth. So it is becoming a blend of both worlds. Wherein you have like small molecules as well as large molecules playing a big role in the entire landscape. Especially, I mean, since I work in oncology, I can definitely say that it is becoming the best of both worlds. So let's say a particular, so I can give you an example. So I'm working on a particular study in which we have a triplet combination. And of course, it is going in the combination side of things as well. So I'm working on a triplet combination in which two are small molecules, one is a biologic or a monoclonal antibody. So it is not a particular and like ADC as we call it, wherein the antibody and drug conjugate is done, but those are separate treatments that are given simultaneously to the patient to get the best efficacy that might be while minimizing toxicity. So yes, so it's not that small molecules are going out and big molecules are coming in. It's more about the correct treatment that can be given to a particular patient.
Okay. Okay.
And
Thanks. I
sorry, and
think
if I can quickly add, as you
yes.
know, that biologics also have a lot of patient compliance issues in terms of because
Yes.
they have to be given IV and you have to, let's say, go into the clinic. I mean, of course, you can have a sub-Q version as well, but that comes later on in the development. But
Yes.
small molecules, you can easily formulate them in capsules, tablets, so on and so forth,
Tablets.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
better patient compliance, where you can just pop a tablet at home instead of going to the clinic to get
Yes.
your IV infusion.
Yes. Yeah, I think thank you so much. I think that answers the question. Guys, if you have any other questions, you can just unmute yourselves and go ahead. I think
Yeah,
there's,
please feel free to
and
ask
I
any
think
questions that are
Tanay,
on your mind. Yeah.
Shinde ma'am has joined. So ma'am, I would please request you to unmute yourself and comment on this meeting. Ma'am,
Hello, hi
are
Shinda
you
ma'am.
there,
I hope
ma'am?
you can see me.
Ma'am, you're muted. Ma'am, please unmute your.
Yeah. Hi. Nice to see you, Tanay.
Hello, hi Shinda ma'am. How are you?
Yeah,
Nice to see
sorry.
you too after a long time.
Yeah, I just joined right now, 5 minutes back, not more than that. I was
Yeah,
in the
welcome,
college.
welcome.
I was in the college.
Oh, nice, nice, nice.
Yeah.
So, is it? So you guys have like vacation or something right now, right?
Yeah,
Or is
we
it?
have vacation, but there is some meeting was there, so I went there. But
Oh,
that
nice.
is fine. So you were just talking about some this one conjugated or some small molecules delivery plus monoclonal antibody, and from there onwards I have started. Means I have watched. But very
Yeah,
nice to
sure.
see you.
Yeah,
Where
nice
at
to see you
present
too.
you're working on what?
So I'm currently working at Novartis Pharmaceuticals, and I'm working on late stage oncology drug development. So I work
I,
in clinical pharmacology and like clinical trials, and
hmm.
also let's say dose projections, dose recommendations in
Hmm.
oncology patient populations. So that's what
I.
I'm working on. So I'm specifically working on breast cancer and melanoma.
Okay. 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 Good. Very good.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And
Yeah.
it is good to see you, and we'll keep in touch.
Yes, yes. In between, you always say that, Madam ओळखतो का?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. ओळखलं तर जरूर, yeah.
Yes, I got that message, Madam ओळखलं का? Okay, okay, very nice one.
Yeah,
Okay
nice to
then.
see you, man.
Yeah,
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 thanks for attending. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Sure. Okay then.
yeah.
Bye.
Guys,
Thank
any more
you.
questions? I think in case you have, you can always get
Sir,
in touch with Tanay. Yeah, somebody's asking something.
sir, hello. This
Yes,
is
Yeah,
Yash
yes,
from
yes.
HYBCom.
yes, yes.
I would like to ask about the research opportunities in Scandinavian countries.
I mean, sorry, I'm not too well versed with the research opportunities over there, but I mean, I'm pretty sure there must be a lot of
So, Tanay,
opportunities
I
there.
can put some light.
Yes.
So, I just had
Hmm.
to, like, I just spent some time in Finland, and I can tell you there are lot of opportunities. There are, see, population is less, competition is less, but then correspondingly, opportunities are less. And one thing is they don't really, I mean, they are more biased towards taking people from their own clan still. So it's not that they don't take, but for that you really need to have their language in place, because a lot of functioning there goes by they don't really have English as the medium, you know. So like Finland would have Finnish, Sweden would have Swedish, Denmark would have its own, and so on. So if you do a PhD there and you get a hang of language, I think then the prospects are great. That's what I've seen. And with the friends I have there, that's how. So there are Indians who've gone from here, and they're doing their PhDs. Somebody's in Boehringer and stuff like that. But it's all about they've had to pick up the language, like, you know. So I
Yeah.
don't
Thank
think
you.
Tana in US that's the case, because US is very uh, open that way, isn't it?
Yeah, and thanks a lot, Vivek, for coming to my rescue once again.
No, no,
So,
no. Well,
yeah, so I mean, I just wanted to mention that, I mean, so long as you can demonstrate your value, so long as you can demonstrate your value, I don't think, I mean, and of course, I can speak from my experience in the US, and a lot of my colleagues in Europe, not Scandinavian countries especially, but let's say UK or France or whatever. Like, if you can demonstrate your value, you can get into whichever country or whichever program you want to get into. And of course, like there might be some countries which are way more restrictive. And of course, like US, fortunately, till now at least, it has not been that way. So yeah, so like demonstrate your value. If you feel that a particular Scandinavian program is really good and you really want to get into it, you can definitely demonstrate your value, submit your application. If you are selected, good. If not, it's still okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tane, for a very interactive session. We all are privileged to have you helping out our students as a mentor for this session. And I know definitely that somewhere deep down beyond this session also you will be a reaching hand to a student. So we've just raised some questions that they had in this session, but definitely more will come as they go towards their final year. So thank you for your time on this weekend, and thank you for coming down to BCP to throw some light on opportunities abroad, especially in the area of drug development. Thank you so much. So I
Yeah,
now officially conclude this session, but before that, on an end note, would you like to give a mantra or something that you live by or that will
yeah.
help you
So
survive abroad?
yeah, so thank you very much, Galvina, and thank you very much, Vivek, for inviting me. It is an absolute pleasure to come, to have this particular webinar to shed some light on certain things that I might know. And I'm always eager to give back to BCP because BCP has given me a lot, frankly, and I'm really thankful to all the professors and everyone who has helped me throughout my career, and thanks a lot for that. So, a couple of things that I wanted to mention finally to go back to my original statements. Always be curious, always be inspired, and it will definitely take you places or take you to places. So, please follow that and learn a lot in BCP, play a lot of sports in BCP, and enjoy your life at BCP because it is one of the best that you will have. So, thank you so much again for inviting me, and good luck. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tanay, for
Tanay.
your kind words. I'll just conclude the session. I request you all to drop your call. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye
Yeah.
bye. Thanks.
Bye.